It is a pleasure to be here, surrounded by such a dynamic audience and speaking alongside such an accomplished group of women. The story I'm here to share with you today, my story, is one of a relative newcomer to the technology sector, making the transition to a leadership role and trying to overcome the confidence gap to successfully navigate the technology sector as a non-expert. So along the way, I've had to step outside my comfort zone and realize that what got me here might not take me where I want to go. So life before GE. Life before GE had taught me that success was tied to deep domain expertise. My career was in the Foreign Service, the Canadian Foreign Service, and I was in the Trade Policy Branch, which is the part of the department that leads Canada's negotiations on free trade agreements. Trade policy is an intensely risk-averse environment. There are very clear divisions and dividing lines between the different disciplines within it. And those delineations create the boundaries of whose voice matters. An air services negotiator is not likely to comment on the intellectual property chapter of an FTA. When I was an investment treaty negotiator, it was my job to become the internal expert on our investment relationship, the economic structures and regulatory frameworks, of our negotiating partners, and then relate that to our treaty text. So it was an environment that rewarded individuals who would devote themselves to developing deep expertise. And it was a fairly straightforward equation. You got out what you put in. And that equation was entirely within my control. Well, I loved that. I loved that because control and self-reliance were really important to me. When I was growing up, I had a very volatile life. My parents split in a messy divorce when I was 10, and overnight we went from a comfortable but extremely dysfunctional middle-class lifestyle to the edge of poverty. That's what happens with divorce sometimes. So working in a world where securing my place at the table came through diligence, through becoming the smartest person on my file, and my path to advancement was through specialization, and all of that I could control. So it worked really well for me. In 2013, I made a change. I left the government and I joined GE as the government affairs and policy leader for energy in Canada. And it turned out to be a bigger change than I had ever anticipated. I don't know how much any of you know about GE, but we basically do everything. And on any given day, I could be expected to advance our objectives with governments on issues as diverse as cybersecurity in the grid or pipeline safety technology, and everything in between. And while internally it was clear where my voice fit, externally, when I was representing the company and doing that at the same table as people who had spent 20 years to become the expert on things like alternative fueling systems for locomotives, which is a real thing, well, that was a challenge. I had moved into a more strategic role at a highly diversified company. And so no matter how much effort I put in, I was not going to become an expert in all of the areas that I was responsible for. And that wasn't easy, and it wasn't comfortable. So about a year into my role, I read a book by General Stanley McChrystal, and it's called Team of Teams. It's a book about transformation. Transformation of the military's organizational culture in the face of a changing world. McChrystal wrote that the military's strict division of information and authority according to specialized areas of expertise simply could not respond to highly decentralized, yet somehow coherent and effective terrorist cells in Iraq. Instead, McChrystal had to break down those silos, create a shared vision, and tap into a diverse array of skills, capabilities, and expertise by creating a team of teams. Shortly after reading that book, I found myself in yet another room full of technical experts advising government. And in this case, they were almost exclusively male engineers. In that room, expertise was wielded like a weapon. And as I sat there, listening to these people speak so authoritatively to the piece of the puzzle for which they were a technical expert, I felt this twinge of nostalgia from my previous life. It had felt so much more comfortable to be that authoritative voice, to be that individual locus of knowledge for something. And I thought to myself, had I made a mistake leaving that behind? Well, studies show that highly accomplished, confident women experience a confidence gap when they're required to speak to issues outside their area of expertise. And that's in contrast to men, whose confidence level doesn't vary with expertise. I offer no comment on the research. But I was sitting in that room, and I was struggling with my own confidence gap. And I realized that if I was going to be successful in this new stage of my career, that I was going to have to do my own transformation, not unlike the one McChrystal wrote about. To start that transformation, I had to take stock of the world I had entered. And the first thing I thought about was the language that I use every day to talk about what it takes to drive technology development. Words like collaboration, connectivity, risk tolerance, disruption, and cross-fertilization. And when I applied those same words to how I thought about my voice, my role in a conversation, I saw where I fit. Those silos that McChrystal wrote about, they're great at fostering expertise, but they can also act as boxes that determine where we play and who we play with. And ultimately, that can constrain the range of solutions that we believe are available to us. So by breaking down those silos, bringing new ideas to the table, and acting as a connector, I saw that I could do something unique. And I could drive a systems approach that would leverage all of that expertise in the room and contribute to a more robust outcome. So a month later, at the next meeting of that same group, I spoke out louder than I had at the first. I challenged the piecemeal approach that was being taken and the lowest common denominator outcome that seemed inevitable. And it worked. We actually made some breakthroughs. And we all landed in a place that we hadn't previously contemplated. So that's what I see my mission as today. Breaking down barriers, building connections, and driving new kinds of solutions. It required me to change my mindset, to reorder the value I had placed on expertise over collaboration, and to take myself out of the box I had put myself in. My story is not unique. In many ways, it is the natural progression from a mid-level to leadership role, and that's why I think it matters. Maybe some of you here today are dealing with similar challenges. So I invite you to ask yourself two things. First, how are you valuing the contributions of non-experts when you're making your decisions? And second, will what got you here today take you where you want to go? Thank you.